ride.
Want a lift?
Hey! Okay, dude, let's see what that jalopy can do!
What's a jalopy?
First off the line.
Yeah, I'm sure they're feeling pretty silly right now.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Megas Month. So, today's episode that we're gonna actually be reviewing is All I Wanted Was a Slushie, and the plot synopsis is that title. So, yeah, it's basically just what you expect. Coop just wants a slushie, and the thread of the episode basically just won't let him have one. I should mention, just not like deliberately or anything like that. It's trying to destroy the planet, of course, but Coop is just kind of, but of course it just so happens to, in its tirade to try and destroy the Earth, keeps destroying all the slushie shops, and Coop eventually just gets sick of it. But yeah, the episode then opens up with Coop, Jamie and Kiva doing a field test in Goat's garage, or rather in Goat's his junkyard, and Goat is currently sunning himself with one of those little sun plate things that are supposed to redirect the sun on you so that you tan better. And of course, the way that Coop is actually testing all of his abilities is that he's actually using the various vehicles and stuff that are lying around in Goat's junkyard for target practice. Basically, he's just picking them up and throwing them for pitching to make sure as a system check, and also because Coop is starting to get a little annoyed with it, because obviously it's a particularly hot day, and he does point out that it is indeed getting a little bit warmer, and Jamie is also kind of annoyed, pointing out that the system-wide check is just kind of that the check that Kiva's having them run through is just taking forever. At which point Kiva just points out that he doesn't really need to be there since he's not really doing anything. And yeah, this is a thing. Jamie, this was established as early as the first episode, but Jamie doesn't really do anything besides provide moral support and occasionally point out when an alien threat is there. That's really all he does. He's just there to kind of provide moral support. That's literally his purpose on their team. Coop's the muscle, Kiva's the brain, and Jamie's the moral support. That's it. That is the trio that's their trifecta. But in case Coop points out that since it's actually hot, and pointing out that the heat actually isn't good for Megas, since there's a very good chance that the engine will overheat. He does point out that he's feeling like he's in a bit of a slushy mood, and it does point out that he actually does want to go for a slushie, and of course Jamie is right there with him, pointing out that they should absolutely go for slushies. But of course Kiva points out that she doesn't want that they need to focus on the mission and focus on training up Megas and making sure that Megas is in fighting form for when the Glorft eventually come back. But after hearing, but of course Coop very much protests about the fact that he really just wants to go get a slushie as soon as possible. But and Kiva does point out that they can go get his drink after they go off to get it, and after they go off and do all their field tests. And when Jamie points out that could very much easily take hours, Coop points out that it could, but it won't, and then proceeds to just hit the gas and go and just kind of floors it and flies off into space with Goat just kind of remarking that he hates it when Coop does that, and goes back to sunning himself. And of course, where Coop decides to actually go and do their full field test to make sure all the systems are running is he decides to just fly Megas into space. And I don't think I've questioned this, but this is like the second episode where it's come up, so I do kind of have to point out I don't think there's any real logical reason why Megas is actually airtight enough to go into space, considering cars are not designed to be airtight. There's various air conditioning units and a whole bunch of other things, and admittedly Kiva has openly admits that the reason that all the heat isn't good for Megas is because she wouldn't let Coop fix the air conditioning because she didn't think it was necessary for their mission. But of course, it also means that Megas was overheating, so they had to go out in the vacuum of space where there is no air to get hot. There's literally nothing in space. But yeah, as for why Megas is able to actually fly around in space, basically fine without having to worry about the vacuum of space, the answer is don't worry about it. It's a cartoon. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But in case Coop is just kind of floating around in the middle of space, playing and Kiva does assess that yes, Coop was very much right, and that all the systems seem to be running phenomenally, but also points out that he's going a little bit too fast and kindly requests him to slow down. And even though he openly admits that they don't really need to slow down, since they're in the middle of space and there's nothing they could actually hit that could cause Megas problems. But then Coop actually winds up running into something. It's not clear what they ran into, just something. And Kiva is visibly confused as well, because she's a very logical person. But she does point out that it doesn't seem like they hit anything, and there's no evidence of what it was they actually hit. But decides that to be on the safe side, that they should actually go back home and do some repairs. And Coop is very happy about that, because it means slushy time. And Kiva kind of relents and lets him go and get his she puts it, his cold beverage drink thing that he's so obsessed with. So Coop is Coop happily just flies Megas back home, unaware that what they actually hit was apparently some sort of stealth alien spacecraft with a cloaking device. And because Coop wound up hitting it, it caused the cloaking device to actually shut down, and the systems on the ship shut down shortly after. And we do meet two very crab-like aliens who are actually I don't think they actually have names or actually given them in the episode, but these little crab-looking aliens are the people in charge of the ship. But and of course they're very worried about they're trying very hard to make sure that their ship isn't going offline, because apparently they have some very dangerous cargo aboard that they were told to dump into a black hole at their earliest convenience. And sure enough, that they are actually because the systems are shutting down, the ship is actually blowing up, and the two eventually decide to bail. And sure enough, kind of break off from the main spacecraft and into an escape pod. And while they're in the escape pod, they admit that they should probably lay low for a while and point to Earth, calling it the big blue planet, and point out that might be a good place to get some beverages and drinks. But then the one alien, the skinny one, then points out that he does feel sorry for whoever actually lives on that planet, because as it turns out, the cargo has actually gotten loose and is now about to land on the planet. And sure enough, we do actually see what happens with that, and it does wind up being a very big problem. But of course, we then cut to Coop, Kiva, and Jamie just kind of sitting in traffic, and rather humorously, they're using Megas to do it, because Megas, and it's just this really funny juxtaposition where they're standing in the middle of traffic with their giant robot. Everybody else is just kind of going through their normal pace, and funnily enough, nobody sees a problem with this. It is just a funny. It's a very Jersey thing where it's like, not my circus, not my monkeys. It is a very Jersey thing to not really pay attention to what's going on around you. I should mention that. It's a very Jersey thing where it's just like, yeah, this is normal. This is just giant robot parked in the middle of the road. That's completely fine. And of course, Jamie protests why Coop is actually just standing around in traffic and when they could be flying there. But Coop points out that it's actually too hot to fly, and once again reiterates that all the heat isn't good for Megas. But and at which point he does point out that they do decide to actually start talking about what kind of slushies they're going to get. And Coop and Jamie both have their preferred flavors, and kind of argue, kind of just talk back and forth about what their favorite flavors are. And Kiva, who isn't really familiar with the concept of a slushie, asks them why they like those drinks so bad. And of course, Coop just admits that they're just a really fun way to actually just beat the summer heat and just kind of cool off. And also proceeds to wonder how Kiva actually cools off in the future if she doesn't seem to be familiar with the concept of slushie. And of course, she admits that what they actually use is some sort of ration with electrolyte solutions in it to kind of replenish the body's natural cooling properties. So there's a bit of pseudoscience in there that does indeed make sense, because electrolytes are meant to replenish your body. But of course, Coop Coop does point out that that's kind of a sad way to live, and does point and points out that here in 2004 they actually rehydrate the proper way, which is with a nice, cool, refreshing beverage of slushie. And Jamie points out, and the two of them then proceed to go off all the benefits of actually going to get a slushie, about how it's cool and refreshing and a whole bunch of other things. But then Jamie brings up that it's actually $1.50, and Coop quickly realizes that they may not have money for it, and Jamie even points out that he didn't bring any money either, because of course. But immediately realize that the best way to actually look into it is to actually start looking through the seats. But as we're looking through the seats and moving through traffic, it's one of the, there's actually a really humorous scene where this one guy cuts Coop off in his little vehicle, and Coop just kind of yells at him in it is a very Jersey way, where they just kind of go back and forth about the fact that one guy cut the other guy off in traffic, and but it winds up working out a little bit differently in Coop's favor, because he just picks up the car and places it on a nearby building, which is very funny. And with that, they then proceed to go back to looking for change to try and scrounge some things up. Well, Kiva tries to assess what it actually is they hit and if there's any sort of damage to Megas, pointing out that that's a far more important task. And she's not wrong, but of course Coop and Jamie are just leave her to do that, because obviously it's that's her job. Her job is to be the brain. She's supposed to figure those kinds of things out. But of course, as they're actually rooting through the seats to try and find some cash, and Kiva is busy running an assessment on Megas. A little prisoner pod that winds up landing in the middle of a park in Jersey City, and also hits a Pop TV sign, because of course I've explained this. The creators of the show do not like MTV, and for very good reason, because it canceled their previous show. But yeah, they don't like MTV. They will take any shot they can at it, and sure enough, here's no exception. And of course, what we actually find out is that the two crab-like aliens had a very good reason for being worried about the planet, because there's actually this kid who's just kind of walking by with his own slushie, and he turns to see this thing land in the giant crater, and then we actually see a little spider-like robot called that calls itself the Regis Mark V, and what we find, and of course the Regis Mark V is revealed to have a very big opinion of itself, and we do find out there's a very good reason of it, because. And there's a reason why I say it has a very big opinions of itself, even though it's not particularly impressive a robot, because at the time it's debuted, it is a small little spider-like robot that's only like, what, maybe 2-3 feet tall. It's basically the kid that finds it is is taller than it by a lot, but even despite that, the Regis Mark V then remarks that now that it's on Earth, it will now use it. It proclaims itself to be a superior robot bent that will be able to destroy the planet, and nobody on this planet will actually be able to stand up to it, and that the planet's destruction is at hand before walking off, and of course, there is some very comical things where it walks into oncoming traffic and gets hit, but and a couple of other things that of course don't make a very good point about the fact that this thing isn't particularly threatening as of yet. So yeah, not particularly scary. It's not particularly scary, not particularly threatening, and for the time being, it's not particularly worrisome to worry about. But of course, while it's kind of going on a tirade and trying to destroy things, Coop is actually scrunched up enough change, and they do eventually go to the slushie mart, where they actually go and get ready to get the slushie, while Kiva is actually trying to figure out what exactly it is that they're actually trying to assess. But and of course she doesn't. Once again, she doesn't realize she hit anything, and the systems seem to be fine. So she's not worried about it, but she does feel like there's something very strange going on. So she doesn't kind of let it go right away. But in case Kiva actually decides to just wait in Vegas, while Coop and Jamie actually go inside to go get a slushie, and it's at this point where the Regis Mark V is actually currently going on its tirade and trying to destroy things, and And Kiva quickly notices this and quickly realizes she needs to get to Coop because it's obviously that's something they caused and it's something that's their fault, and tries to get in contact with Coop, who is currently in the slushie shop and is currently standing in line to get a slushie, and he's very excited to get that slushie, even though he's waiting in a particularly long line, and he couldn't be happier. He has a big smile on his face. He's shaking around uncontrollably like a little kid, and he just has a fistful of dollars and dollar bills and coins in his hand, and it's fun. It's endearing. Coop is a fun protagonist. He's one of those characters who is just like very comfortable in his own skin and likes what he likes, and of course this just makes it very relatable as a protagonist. Everybody's just like, yeah, he's a nice guy. I do like him. He's a bro basically. He's just really cool. But in any case, when it's eventually time for Coop to actually get to the slushie, and it's revealed that there's actually a cup called the Slushie cup, which he does reveal is like the latest in quote unquote slushy technology, which enables him to store three flavors at once, and Coop immediately fills the Slushie cup with his favorite flavor because he has 3 chambers of it that he can fill, and of course Jamie is very proud of Coop, but also then proceeds to notice that the Reggie's Mark V is actually attacking to destroying things outside, and tells Coop to hurry the hell up basically, because obviously he's very worried that there's a giant robot trying to destroy it. Not the giant robot, but the little mini robot trying to destroy everything, and doing a particularly good job at it despite its size. But Coop isn't really paying attention, and eventually the Reggie's Mark V manages to pick up a car and throw it, and it lands on the slushie machine and gets destroyed with Coop's slushie in it, and of course Coop is visibly upset about this, and while the Reggie's Mark V is continuing to destroy things, Coop and Jamie eventually get back inside Megas. Off screen, I should mention, it's not particularly shown how they actually get back into Megas. It's just that they do, and of course they immediately Coop immediately points out that that they wrecked the slushie machine, and he wants a new one. He wants a new slushie, and of course the Reggie's Mark V then proceeds to go on and boast about how it's invincible and nobody can defeat it, and a whole bunch of other things. But at which point Coop just kind of steps on it because it's only like a couple of feet tall, whereas Megas is like, oh, closer to 300. So yeah, Megas kind of wins that fight single-handedly, and just kind of and Coop just kind of scrapes off Megas's foot and then proceeds to and pointing out that the problem seems to be solved for the time being. Then immediately turns on scanner technology and triangulation, and of course Kiva points out that that's actually something kind of sensible and brilliant, pointing out that they could very easily figure out where the robot came from. But of course Coop isn't using that for its intended purpose. He's turning it on so they can actually find the nearest slushie shop so they can go get a new slushie, and of course they do exactly that. They find the nearest slushie shop at a place called Uncle Tom's, and proceed to wander off in the general direction of the closest slushie machine. And Coop even admits that it's very likely that they're not going to have to deal with the Reggie's Mark V again, pointing out that and of course, there's not really going to be probably not going to come back, and even though it boasted about being invincible, he very quickly dealt with it, so he's not particularly worried. But then we find out that he probably should be worried, because even though the Reggie's Mark V was destroyed, it quickly becomes apparent that it can't be destroyed permanently. As it turns out, Coop is able to actually, unbeknownst to Coop, Kiva, and Jamie, the Reggie's Mark V proceeds to kind of piece itself back together, and then uses various things from around the environment to piece itself back together. Case in point, the kid from earlier shows up, and he gets his bikes taken by it, and then it also uses it also uses the nearby mailbox to repair itself. And once again, gloating that it's invincible, it then proceeds to put itself back together and gets ready to once again destroy some things. And sure enough, this is as Coop is arriving at Uncle Tom's, of course it's at this point where the Reggie's Mark V then proceeds to show up again, and Coop once again points out that he thought he dealt with it, and then yells at it, pointing out that he thought they settled this last time. But of course the Reggie's Mark V once again goes on about how it's invincible and that Coop is not going to be able to destroy it, and then proceeds to gloat that there is indeed no warrior on Earth who's ever going to be able to destroy it. But Coop immediately picks it up, smashes it into a pancake, and just kind of throws it into a nearby what is it? He just kind of throws it into a nearby playground, and of course this winds up dealing with it for the time being. But Kiva points out that Coop should be asking the very obvious question about how the Regis Mark V actually came back. And of course, then proceeds to immediately go and investigate it. And when Coop asks her if she wants anything, since she's going into the store anyway, she merely asks him to pick up a new time flux unit so that she can get, as she puts it, so she can get out of this Neanderthal nightmare. But of course, Coop points out the very obvious fact that they don't sell time flux units at the convenience store at Uncle Tom's, and then asks her if she wants some beef jerky instead, which she happily agrees to. At which point, Coop then proceeds to go into the shop and immediately starts counting his money, which kind of slows up the shop a little bit. But meanwhile, Kiva goes to where the Regis Mark V landed in the nearby playground, and goes to investigate and tries to figure out what exactly it is the Regis Mark V actually is. And eventually she does determine why the Regis Mark V is able to keep coming back, and goes to call up Coop and Jamie, who by this point are already in the store and don't actually hear her because she's obviously contacting them through Magus's control system. But of course, the two of them are inside currently trying to buy a slushie, so of course they don't hear her. And there's also a comical scene where as Coop's counting his money, Goat shows up and kind of gloats about how he got his slushie already and starts slurping it down, and tells Coop that he's very happy to have his favorite flavors, whereas Coop, in the middle of counting his money, gets distracted because Goat decided to just come up and talk to him out of the blue, and has to start over, much to the rest of the line's chagrin. But in case, as we find out, as Kiva explains, the reason the Regis Mark V is able to keep coming back is because it's apparently made with nanotechnology, which means it can just piece itself together from basically any metal in the surrounding area. Case in point, as she's actually giving her report to Coop, who of course isn't actually paying attention or listening to her because he's inside the convenience store at the time. It starts putting itself together using the various pieces of playground equipment, and starts chasing her. And she eventually does manage to, and while it does kind of start trying to absorb her and tries to eat her and tries to eat all the various other things that are surrounding her, because I should mention this, Kiva has a couple of metal accessories on her that the robot could very easily cling to. So of course Kiva immediately runs as far as she can, and eventually gets back to Megas. In the process, Coop eventually does finally get his Mega Slush, and he comes back to Megas as Kiva is actually getting chased by the Regis Mark V, and all three of them do eventually pile into the machine, but then the Regis Mark V actually knocks him over before he can actually take a sip of it, and of course because of that, his slushie then completely pours out, and Coop is admittedly very pissed off about the fact that the Regis Mark V once again cost him a slushie, and decides that it's time to actually start smashing. But Kiva actually stops him, pointing out that they can't really that they're not going to be able to smash it because obviously we know why the Regis Mark V can't be smashed into pieces, but Coop doesn't listen because obviously, first and foremost, he wasn't there when Kiva was giving her report, so he has no idea why the Regis Mark V can't be destroyed. But two, he also points out that smashing things is actually one of his strengths, and points out that he very much likes smashing things, and of course even Jamie actually winds up taking Kiva's side, pointing out that obviously they've smashed this robot twice now, it's come back, and he points out that smashing may not be the way to go. So of course Kiva then after much pushing, then eventually convinces Coop that he needs to figure out a way to destroy the robot that isn't smashing, and of course Coop eventually decides that to actually pull out Megas' flamethrower, which just emerges from his chest and just sets the robot on fire, which does indeed work for the time being, and shuts it down, and proceeds to get ready to go off to the nearest to the next closest slushie shop. But the Regis Mark V just puts itself back together, and Coop eventually realizes that he's not going to be able to have a moment's rest, since obviously not smashing it didn't work either, and And of course, Coop points out that obviously, since not smashing it worked, he's just going to have to find the right way to actually smash it to keep it from coming back. And sure enough, he then proceeds to actually then there's just this montage where Coop is trying to smash up the Regis Mark V while also inadvertently destroying every single slushie shop in town. And of course, this does wind up causing problems, but Coop quickly realizes that he's not unable to actually smash it, but he does eventually get to the point where he thinks he's finally won, but then discovers, much to his horror, that Jamie informs him that there's only one slushie machine in town, and that's the drive-thru, which much to Coop's chagrin, because he doesn't like going through the drive-thru. So and made worse by the fact that Coop has a giant robot now, so yeah, it's a little bit harder to get to actually go through the drive-thru, because for obvious reasons. Obviously, a giant robot. I mean, they did it single-handedly, but one thing I didn't mention is that Coop had to physically pick up the restaurant so they could get their order from the drive-thru. So yeah, Coop doesn't particularly like going through the drive-thru with Megas, but in any case, he then decides that that's actually that they might as well have no choice, and eventually does arrive at the drive-thru and does try to put in a couple of orders for slushies, and there's just garbled static on the other end, because of course it's a drive-thru. You guys have been to a drive-thru, you know that how it's basically incomprehensible to talk to the other person on the other end of the drive-thru. You guys know exactly what that kind of struggle is, but and of course, Coop once again bemoans the fact that he has to go through the drive-thru, pointing out that he hates the drive-thru, but it's at this point where the Regis Mark V, now a lot bigger, then proceeds to show up and proceeds to actually smash the drive-thru, and Coop quickly points out that was the very last drive-thru in the very last slushie shop in the Greater Jersey area. But of course, Jamie then points out that there's always Hoboken, but Coop points out that he doesn't really want to go to Hoboken because it's Hoboken. He doesn't want to go to Hoboken, but yeah, again, I don't really know what's going on with Hoboken. Probably had some problems back in the day. Probably still does, but yeah, for whatever reason, Coop and Jamie just kind of shoot insults at Hoboken, but in case Coop eventually starts smashing up the robot, and at this point he's very sick of it, but and of course does eventually manage to actually smash the robot up, but and of course then proceeds to wonder where exactly it is he can actually get another slushie, and eventually discovers that despite the Regis Mark V actually smashing up the drive-thru, the slushie machine is still very much intact. Or at least it was until Coop smashed up the Regis Mark V, and then the Regis Mark V just kind of eats it. So, and once again, the Regis Mark V puts itself back together, gloating about the fact that Coop will never be able to beat it, and points out that his primitive human tech will never be able to defeat the Regis Mark V, and then it proceeds to try and absorb Megas, which winds up causing Coop to get very pissed off as he tries to fight it off, and Jamie even mentions that there's a very good chance they could die if the Regis Mark V successfully absorbs them, and it does temporarily, but Coop does eventually manage to punch his way out, but all that really happens is that the Regis Mark V just kind of reforms again, because that's how it's established to work, and of course, Coop eventually gets to the point where he's just sick of it not letting him have his slushie. So he opens fire with with Megas' Gatling guns, and just kind of shoots it into a million pieces, and then sarcastically remarks that it should try and regenerate from that. And sure enough, it's just completely destroyed into like a million pieces, and is seemingly unable to reform. And Jamie even points out that it seems like that actually worked. And sure enough, now that Coop is actually happy about the fact that Coop points out that he actually wound up saving Jersey City, but at what cost? And then opens the roof of his Megas head to actually just kind of bemoan the fact that he never got his slushie. But of course, while Coop is actually distracted, just kind of letting out a very loud no because he doesn't have any ways to get a slushie. The Regis Mark V actually starts putting itself together like a million times, and eventually, Coop is just happy about the fact that they were able to destroy the robot, even though it cost him a slushie. And it's at this point where Jamie points out that if Coop was sure it was just the one, and if it wasn't like a million of them, and Coop points out that he was pretty sure it was just the one, but then Jamie points out the very obvious that the Regis Mark V has actually put itself together and created like a million pieces of itself, and now has an entire army to fight back against Coop. And and the Regis Mark V once again points out that it's invincible and that Coop is never going to be able to destroy it, and that's is now far more powerful than he could ever actually hope to destroy. And of course Coop then finally having been pushed to his limit, finally unveils his signature trash talk for the episode, where he kind of points out that he's pissed off at the Regis Mark V for just costing him his slushie basically the whole episode, and then proceeds to point out that, and then proceeds to just kind of to also, on top of the fact, try to absorb his robot, and now he's pissed. And then proceeds to pull out Megas' Gatling guns again, and just kind of goes ham on firing at all the Regis units, and just kind of systematically completely destroys them. Which of course Kiva and Jamie quickly notice the very obvious problem, and that's Megas is actually overheating because of all of this, and quickly realize that if they don't, and Kiva points out that if Coop keeps this up, the Megas will eventually shut down, and sure enough, that does wind up happening. Coop does eventually manage to destroy all the Regis Mark V units, but he also winds up causing Megas to actually shut down because the engine overheats, and of course Coop once again points out that the heat isn't good for Megas, and sure enough, when he tries to start a Megas again, it just causes a bunch of fumes to actually bellow out, and the Regis Mark and while Coop is trying to figure out how to get his engine to start up again, and the engine just kind of stalling, the Regis Mark V does start putting itself back together, but then some of them notably fall over, and Kiva eventually figures out why. As it turns out, all the exhaust from the failing engine are actually blocking out the sun, which is causing the Regis Mark V to shut down, and she eventually realizes that the Regis Mark V is solar powered, and that's how they're supposed to defeat it. And of course, Coop points out the very obvious solution about how they could very easily just wait for the sun to go down, so that the Regis Mark V is unable to actually fight back against them. But of course, Kiva points out the very obvious flaw in that plan, and that's they're currently fighting the Regis Mark V now, which means they need to deal with it as quickly as humanly possible in a way that doesn't involve them dying. And of course, eventually realizing that Kiva's right, then starts flooding the engine. That's how he wins. He just floods the engine and just sends a bunch of smog up into the air. And while the Regis Mark V does grab Megas and eventually tries to rip it apart, and Coop apologizes to Megas for not treating it better, eventually Coop does manage to make enough smog to actually shut down the Regis Mark V, and it shuts down mid-spiel about how it's invincible and cannot be defeated. And eventually, yes, the Regis Mark V does eventually, the Regis Mark V and its various clone copies do eventually fall apart, and of course Coop is very happy about the fact that he finally saved the world, but it also becomes apparent that the world is very, very in a very bad place, because yeah, turns out trying to block out the sun with your smog from your vehicle will just cause a winter, because now there's no sun to actually heat up the earth, and sure enough, it becomes a very obvious problem where once again Coop causes as many problems as he solves. A lot of the destruction is Coop's fault in this show. But of course, now having finally defeated the Regis Mark V, Coop eventually notices that there is indeed one last slushie machine still left intact, and after helping himself to it by just kind of eating it directly from the tap, he eventually pours Kiva a tri slushie, and asks her to take a drink from it, and pointing out that she could love it, and Kiva immediately curious about how good the slushie actually is, that Coop and Jamie both wanted one so badly, then decides to actually take a sip, and does point out that it's pretty good, but which Coop and Jamie do kind of give a thumbs up to, but then she winds up giving herself brain freeze with Jamie just remarking that she's an amateur, and then eventually the two crab aliens then come along and start cleaning up the Regis Mark V, pointing out that they have about 3 months before the sun comes back, and in that time they need to actually make sure that when the sun does eventually clear out all the smog on their planet, they do need to make sure they have all the units of the Regis Mark V, so that it doesn't actually get into any metal and actually regenerate itself, and of course, they do point out that of course now they have some, but that also points out. But then the fatter alien then does point out that he's actually thirsty because of all the hard work, and wonders if they could actually go to one of their favorite plants to actually get some tea. And of course, the skinnier alien just tells them to shut up and make sure they didn't miss any pieces. And of course, as we find out at the end of the episode, they did indeed miss one piece. As it turns out, the little kid that has been a recurring character in this episode does wind up finding one of the pieces of the Regis Mark V and takes it home with him, and a couple of months later, it does eventually repower itself back on, but it's clear and it's left ambiguous at the end of the episode whether the Regis Mark V will eventually come back, and I'm not entitled 100% on that because obviously the series got canceled, and I don't think the Regis Mark V ever comes back. If I remember correctly, I don't think it does, but yeah, they definitely set up a what-if scenario where the Regis Mark V does eventually come back and tries to destroy things again, but we'll never know because the show was canceled. So maybe it'll come back if they ever are able to make that reboot, but who knows? But yeah, in any case, I did like this episode. I liked how good the slushies actually look. This is actually a fan favorite episode for a lot of people because obviously this episode just kind of showcases the very slice of lifey moments that Megas XLR does so well. It obviously there is some robot fights in giant robot battles, but for the most part, it's just about Coop and Jamie just trying to get a slushie, and well, Kiva is kind of just along for the ride trying to figure out what exactly it is the threat that they're trying to deal with is. And she's not really having any of it from the two boys. I do like how slice of lifey this one is because it's literally just them trying to get a slushie, the alien threat getting in the way, and eventually Coop gets sick of it and decides to smash up the alien robot and eventually save the day. But and I do like how good the slushies look. The slushies just look delicious in this episode, and it is a little bit weird that they didn't wind up making this a promotion. I don't think this was a promotion when this episode came out, but feels like a missed opportunity to if that wasn't a thing, if they didn't do the Try Slushie cups at the time. But I don't know. I didn't really know any real places to get a slushie at this time, so I don't know. But I do know people that did, and I don't think there was a slushie promotion as far as my research can tell. So. But yeah, I did like this episode. I did very much like the whole I am the Regis Mark V. I'm going to destroy everything, and of course it does eventually wind up with blocking out the sun. But that was more so Coop's fault than anything else. And of course Coop does eventually manage to save the day, but he winds up blocking out the sun in the process. But which is kind of funny, but also kind of a little bit tragic that he just kind of sets off a permanent winter for the time being. And I guess that does kind of settle the whole warm weather thing that was going on in the episode. But in any case, yeah, I did like this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed my review of it. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support the show. That's actually the best way to do that. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I'm always saying thanks, so be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is actually a link to my previous one of these, Courage Month. If you have not seen that, again, link is down in the description. Please go check that out. Please go support that one, and continue to support this one, because this one is once again a very, I mean, it's not as heavy content wise, but because for obvious reasons because the show got canceled. But I did like working on Courage Month. I am very much enjoying working on Megas Month, and I hope you guys will actually go and check both of them out. But yeah, for the time being, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.